Please sit down. Please.
Here?
Yeah, right there.
Hey, how are you?
Alright,
You for the job?
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh.
But I don't have any application.
Oh, no, it's fine. Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead. Alright.
I'm here for the job.
Oh, you are?
Yeah.
Do you have any applications? Oh, that's fine. Go ahead.
Excuse me, I applied for the same job they did. Why did they get to go in?
I told you to be patient. Just sit down, please. Please sit down.
I am a woman and I deserve the same rights as men.
By the beginning of the 20th century, the role of women in American society was changing drastically. Women were working more, receiving a better education, having fewer children, and several states had already accepted female suffrage. In 1919, the 19th Amendment, which stated that the rights of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex, passed both houses of Congress and was sent to the states for ratification. On August 18, 1920, 2/3 of the states accepted the amendment, making it the law of the land. 8 days later, the 19th Amendment took effect. The 1920s was a great period of time for women because in this time, the role of women in society changed immensely, socially, culturally, politically, and economically. Woodrow Wilson also acknowledged the impact women made in World War I, which stimulated many women's movements.
The 1920s was a very productive and interesting time period for many groups of people. This is why they are known as the Roaring Twenties. Before this time period, women were viewed as property, and men didn't really care for them. Their only job was to stay home and clean and take care of their children and husbands. The 19th Amendment was a milestone for women activists such as Jane Addams, Margaret Sanger, and Elizabeth Freeman. More and more women started to stand up and protest for their rights. When the United States entered World War I in 1914, the women took a more active role in politics and society. Current President Woodrow Wilson acknowledged their impact and supported their enfranchisement. This is when Rosie the Riveter originated, creating and spreading the message that women are just as good as men and that they can do anything a man does. Some key political changes for women were the 19th Amendment, the Shepherd-Towner Act of 1921, and the impact of Planned Parenthood. When women get the right to vote, it changed everything because they earned more respect and even men started seeing what they were capable of doing, the same things they could. The Shepherd-Towner Act was the first venture of the federal government into Social Security legislation and the first major legislation that came to exist after the full enfranchisement of women. In addition, the Promotion of the Welfare of Hygiene and Maternity and Infancy Act was put into place, which provided federal funding for maternity and child care. Many women were able to go see medical physicians and they could now be eligible to go get checkups and regular doctor visits. With this new act of Congress came many new foundations such as Planned Parenthood and the National American Women's Suffrage Association.
Women like Margaret Sanger and Carrie Chapman Catt played important roles in this time period. Margaret Sanger was a birth control activist and a sex educator. She protested for the idea that women had a choice of birth or not, and that is why she was a part of Planned Parenthood and opened the first birth control clinic in the United States.
The role of women in society has changed in 1920 when all women were given the right to vote. The roles of American women in the 1920s varied from the new women to the traditionalists of the older generation. This was a start to when women were breaking away from conservative values and disobedient to the norms of what the traditionalists were used to. The new women were flappers who were a generation of young Western women in the 1920s who wore short skirts, bobbed their hair, listened to jazz, and flaunted their disdain for what was then considered acceptable behavior. The traditionalists opposed the changes of these new women. The lives of Black American women in the 1920s also changed due to the influence of the Harlem Renaissance and the change from rural to urban life in the cities. Great advances were made specifically in creative arts, musicals, and visual arts. They broke free of the moral values that the whites had provided for them in the Victorian era. Intellect and talent was surely a cultural awakening to those who were impacted by the improvements from African and Western American women in the Roaring '20s.
By the end of the decade, more women began to put on more social improvements, like protective laws for child labor and prison reform. For education in North Carolina, female high school students were expected to go to college. But if they did, they had to go to a private school or women's college in Greensboro, where it was an all-female school. Most of the women that would come out of college would become a nurse or a teacher because that was the ideal job for them. If women lived in rural areas, they had no electricity where they couldn't use a fridge, couldn't cook a whole lot, and couldn't iron. In the 1920s, about 15% of white and 30% of black women with wage-earning husbands held paying jobs. Most Americans believed that women shouldn't have jobs and should only stay home and take care of the house and kids. But some women took jobs as textile mills. By 1922, North Carolina was a leading manufacturing state, and the mills were hiring women, but they didn't hire black women because of segregation. White mill workers often hired black women as domestic and child care workers, but one of the biggest tobacco manufacturers employed both black and white women, but separated workers by gender and race.
You're hired.
Thank you, 19th Amendment.